The morning sun barely touched the edges of the training compound when the first shot rang out across the empty field. The bullet kicked up dust 3 feet to the left of the target, and Sergeant Marcus Hendricks lowered his binoculars with a heavy sigh. This was the fifth day in a row, and the pattern remained the same. The young recruits could not hit their marks. The training facility sat on the outskirts of Fort Benning, Georgia, a sprawling complex of ranges and obstacle courses where soldiers learned the deadly art of precision shooting. Hendricks had been an instructor for 12 years, and he had seen his share of struggling students. But this group was different. They had the discipline, the focus, and the physical capability. They studied the manuals, practiced their breathing, and followed every instruction to the letter. Yet when they squeezed the trigger, the bullets went everywhere except where they were supposed to go. Private James Cooper was the first to arrive that morning, his rifle already cleaned and prepared for another day of frustration. He was 22 years old, fresh from basic training, with dreams of becoming an elite marksman. His father had been a sniper in Desert Storm, and James carried that legacy like a weight on his shoulders. Every missed shot felt like a betrayal of the family name. Behind him came Private First Class Angela Torres, a sharp-eyed woman from Texas who could field-strip a rifle faster than anyone in the unit. She had grown up hunting with her grandfather and knew her way around firearms better than most of the men in her squad. Yet here, at this range, with these military-grade weapons, she could not find her rhythm. The targets seemed to mock her with their untouched surfaces. Private Derek Wilson arrived next, followed by the twins, Nathan and Nicholas Reed. All of them wore the same expression of determination mixed with doubt. They had been at this for weeks now, and their confidence was beginning to crack. Other units had moved on to advanced training, while they remained stuck on the basics, firing round after round into the dirt and air. Sergeant Hendricks gathered them at the firing line as he did every morning. He was a tall man with weathered skin and eyes that had seen combat in 3 different countries. His voice carried across the range without him needing to shout. "Another day, another chance to get it right," he said, though his tone suggested he had little hope of improvement. "Cooper, you're up first. Show me what you've got." James stepped forward and took his position. He had done this hundreds of times now. He knew the stance, the grip, the sight alignment. He controlled his breathing just as the manual instructed, letting half the air out of his lungs before holding steady. His finger rested on the trigger with just the right amount of pressure. Everything felt correct. The rifle kicked against his shoulder, and the bullet sailed high and to the right, missing the target by nearly 4 feet. James closed his eyes and let out a breath that had nothing to do with shooting technique. It was pure frustration. "Torres, your turn," Hendricks called out. Angela stepped up with her rifle, trying to ignore the growing knot in her stomach. She had been so confident when she arrived at this training facility. Now she felt like an amateur who had never held a weapon before. She aimed, breathed, and fired. The bullet hit the ground 2 feet short of the target. One by one, the young snipers took their turns. Derek Wilson pulled his shots to the left. Nathan Reed shot too high. Nicholas Reed came closest, but his bullet still missed by 18 inches. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, and the temperature began to rise, but the only thing heating up faster was the frustration building in each of them. By mid-morning, they had burned through 300 rounds of ammunition, and the targets remained largely untouched. A few lucky shots had clipped the edges, but nothing that would qualify as acceptable marksmanship. Hendricks finally called a break, and the recruits collapsed in whatever shade they could find. "I don't understand it," James said to no one in particular. "I'm doing everything right. Everything the manual says, everything the instructor tells us. Why can't I hit the target?" Angela pulled off her cap and wiped the sweat from her forehead. "Maybe it's the rifles. Maybe something is off with the equipment." "We checked the rifles," Derek replied. 3 times. Every scope is zeroed correctly. Every barrel is clean. It's not the equipment. It's us." The twins sat together in silence, both thinking the same thought but neither wanting to say it out loud. Maybe they were not cut out for this. Maybe they should request a transfer to a different specialty. There was no shame in being a regular infantry soldier. Not everyone could be a sniper. Hendricks walked over to where his assistant instructor stood watching the failed training session. Lieutenant Sarah Vega had been observing for the past hour, taking notes and occasionally shaking her head. She was younger than Hendricks, but she had seen combat in Afghanistan and earned a Silver Star for her actions during a firefight in Kandahar. "What do you think?" Hendricks asked her quietly. "I think they're in their own heads," Vega replied. "They're so worried about missing that they're guaranteeing they'll miss. It's a mental block. I've tried everything. Relaxation techniques, visualization exercises, even brought in a sports psychologist. Nothing works." Vega tapped her pen against her notepad thoughtfully. "Maybe they need to see someone succeed. Someone who can show them it's possible. I've demonstrated plenty of times. They've watched expert marksmen from other units. It doesn't help. Maybe they need to see someone unexpected succeed. Someone who breaks their assumptions about what a sniper should be." Hendricks looked at her curiously. "What are you suggesting?" Before Vega could answer, a dusty pickup truck pulled up to the training facility's gate. The guard checked identification and waved it through. The truck rolled slowly across the compound and parked near the main building. A woman climbed out, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned to conserve energy in harsh conditions. She was in her mid-50s, with gray threading through her dark hair, which she wore pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her clothes were civilian, jeans and a plain button-up shirt, but she carried herself with unmistakable military bearing. She walked with a slight limp, favoring her left leg, and her right hand bore the scars of old burns. This was Elena Vasquez, though few people at the facility knew her name yet. She had served 22 years in the military, with 12 of those years as a designated marksman and sniper instructor. She had 2 tours in Iraq, one in Afghanistan, and another in an advisory role in Colombia that remained largely classified. She had trained some of the best shooters in the armed forces, and her record of confirmed shots in combat situations was one that few could match. But Elena had been retired for 3 years now, living quietly on a small ranch outside Augusta, where she raised horses and tried to forget the sound of gunfire. She had not held a rifle since the day she was medically discharged after an IED explosion left her with a traumatic brain injury, shrapnel wounds, and nerve damage in her right hand. She walked into the administrative building and asked for the base commander. The young corporal at the desk made a phone call, and within minutes, Colonel Thomas Bradford appeared. He was a broad-shouldered man with close-cropped gray hair and a firm handshake. "Ms. Vasquez, thank you for coming on such short notice," Bradford said warmly. "I wasn't sure I should," Elena replied honestly. "I've been out of the game for a while now. We're not asking you to deploy. We just need your expertise. We have a situation with some recruits, and we think you might be able to help." Bradford explained the problem as they walked toward the training range. The young snipers were skilled in every measurable way, except the one that mattered most. They could not hit their targets. Traditional instruction was not working. They needed a different approach, and Bradford had remembered Elena from a joint training exercise years ago when she had solved a similar problem with a struggling unit. Elena listened without interrupting, her eyes scanning the compound as they walked. She could see the frustration on the faces of the young soldiers even from a distance. She recognized that look. She had worn it herself many years ago when she was just starting out, and could not understand why her shots were not landing where she aimed. They reached the observation post overlooking the range, where Hendricks and Vega were reviewing the morning's dismal results. Bradford made the introductions, and Hendricks looked skeptical when he learned Elena was a retired veteran. "No offense, ma'am, but I've been teaching snipers for over a decade. If I can't figure out what's wrong with these kids, I'm not sure what you can do." Elena smiled slightly. "No offense taken, Sergeant. Sometimes the problem isn't what you're teaching. It's what they're learning despite what you're teaching." She asked to observe the afternoon session without interfering. Hendricks agreed, though his body language suggested he thought this was a waste of time. Elena took a seat in the shade and watched as the recruits returned to the firing line. She observed James Cooper as he set up his shot. She noted the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched before he pulled the trigger. She saw Angela Torres adjust her position 3 times before settling into a stance that looked technically perfect but felt forced. Derek Wilson rushed his breathing, and the Reed twins both had a subtle flinch just before firing, so small that most observers would miss it. But Elena did not miss it. She had spent years learning to read shooters, understanding that marksmanship was not just about mechanics, but about the complex interplay of mind, body, and confidence. These young soldiers were doing everything the textbooks told them to do, but they had lost trust in themselves. They were overthinking every movement, second-guessing every decision, and that internal chaos was translating to external failure. She watched in silence for 2 hours as the recruits fired nearly 400 more rounds with minimal success. By the time Hendricks called an end to the day's training, the young snipers looked defeated. Their shoulders slumped as they cleaned their weapons and prepared to head back to the barracks. Elena stood and walked slowly to the firing line. She ran her scarred hand along one of the rifles, feeling the familiar weight and balance. It had been 3 years since she had held a weapon like this. The doctors had told her that the nerve damage would make precision shooting nearly impossible. She had believed them and had not tried to prove them wrong. Hendricks approached her cautiously. "You see something I'm missing?" "I see a lot," Elena replied. "But talking about it won't help. They need to see something different before they can become something different." "What do you mean?" Elena picked up one of the rifles, checked that it was clear, then loaded a fresh magazine. "I mean, they need to see that perfection isn't the goal, success is the goal. And sometimes success comes from the most unexpected places." Before Hendricks could respond, Elena called out to the recruits who were preparing to leave. "Hold up a minute. I want to show you something." The young soldiers stopped and turned, curious about this civilian woman who seemed to have the officers' respect. They gathered at a safe distance behind the firing line as Elena positioned herself at the shooting station. She did not take a traditional sniper stance. Her position looked almost casual, relaxed in a way that contradicted every rigid military posture they had been taught. Her breathing was not the controlled, measured pattern from the manual. It was natural, easy, as if she were simply standing and looking at something interesting in the distance. She raised the rifle to her shoulder, and her scarred hand found its place on the grip despite the damaged nerves. She did not spend time adjusting or double-checking. She simply looked through the scope, made a tiny correction, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck dead center of the target 600 yards away. The recruits stared in stunned silence. Elena worked the bolt, chambered another round, and fired again. Another center hit. She repeated the process 5 more times, and 5 more bullets found the center mass of the target with mechanical precision. When she lowered the rifle, her hands were trembling slightly from the nerve damage, but her face showed only calm satisfaction. She turned to the wide-eyed recruits and said simply, "Tomorrow morning, we start over. This time, you're going to learn to shoot the way warriors actually shoot, not the way textbooks say they should." That evening, the recruits could talk about nothing else. In the mess hall, James Cooper pushed his food around his plate while replaying Elena's shots in his mind. 7 bullets, 7 perfect hits, and she had made it look effortless. He had spent weeks straining and struggling, trying to force his body into the perfect mechanical form. And this woman with damaged hands had simply picked up a rifle and succeeded. Angela Torres sat across from him, equally lost in thought. Did you see how she stood? It was nothing like what Sergeant Hendricks taught us. She looked almost comfortable, like she was just standing around waiting for a bus or something. Maybe that's the point, Derek Wilson offered from the next table. He had moved closer to join the conversation. Maybe we've been trying too hard to be perfect, and that's why we keep failing. Nathan Reed shook his head. That doesn't make sense. Marksmanship is about precision. Everything has to be exact, controlled, measured. That's what the manual says. That's what every instructor has told us. But she hit every shot, his twin brother Nicholas pointed out. And she did it without following any of those rules. At least, not the way we've been taught them. The debate continued long into the evening. Some of the recruits thought Elena had simply gotten lucky. Others argued that she must have some secret technique that she had not revealed. A few believed that she was just naturally gifted and that her success could not be replicated by ordinary soldiers. But all of them felt a spark of something they had not felt in weeks: hope. Meanwhile, in the officers' club, Colonel Bradford sat with Sergeant Hendricks, Lieutenant Vega, and Elena Vasquez, discussing the plan for the coming days. Hendricks was still skeptical despite what he had witnessed that afternoon. 7 good shots don't prove anything, he argued, though his tone was less certain than before. I can make 7 good shots. Hell, I can make 70. But these recruits have tried everything and nothing sticks. What makes you think you can succeed where established training methods have failed? Elena took a sip of her coffee before responding. Because established training methods are designed for ideal conditions and ideal students. These recruits aren't in ideal conditions. They're under enormous pressure. They've been failing publicly for weeks. Every missed shot reinforces their belief that they can't succeed. You've accidentally trained them to fail, Sergeant. Now we need to untrain that. Hendricks bristled at the suggestion that he had contributed to the problem, but Bradford held up a hand to keep the peace. Explain what you mean, Elena. How have we trained them to fail? Look at how you run the training, Elena said, leaning forward. Every morning they line up at the firing line knowing that everyone will watch them shoot. Every bullet they fire is observed, measured, and judged. When they miss, which they've been doing consistently, that failure happens in front of their peers and their superiors. The pressure builds with each attempt. They start thinking about not missing instead of thinking about hitting. And the more they think, the worse they perform. Lieutenant Vega nodded slowly. It's the spotlight effect. They're so aware of being watched that they can't focus on the actual task. Exactly, Elena confirmed, and it's compounded by the fact that you're teaching them a very rigid technical approach to shooting. That approach works great for students who have time to build confidence gradually. But these soldiers have already lost their confidence. The rigid technique feels like a straitjacket to them now. Every tiny deviation from perfect form makes them panic, and that panic destroys their accuracy. So what's your alternative? Hendricks asked. Just let them shoot however they want? That's not discipline. That's chaos. No, not chaos. Intuition. Combat shooting isn't about achieving perfect form under controlled conditions. It's about hitting your target under whatever conditions exist in that moment. These soldiers need to learn to trust their instincts and adapt to circumstances rather than trying to replicate a textbook position every single time. Bradford looked intrigued. You're talking about a more organic approach. Let them find what works for them individually rather than forcing them all into the same mold. Partially, Elena agreed. But more than that, we need to rebuild their confidence from the ground up. They need to remember what it feels like to succeed before we can teach them to succeed consistently. Hendricks remained unconvinced. But Bradford gave Elena the authority to take over the training for the next 2 weeks. If the recruits showed significant improvement, her methods would be validated. If not, they would return to traditional instruction and likely recommend that several of the soldiers be transferred to other specialties. The next morning arrived with heavy clouds covering the sun, and the temperature was cooler than it had been in days. The recruits assembled at the range to find Elena waiting for them instead of Sergeant Hendricks. She wore cargo pants and a simple t-shirt, looking more like someone heading out for a weekend of casual shooting than a military instructor. Good morning, she said without the formal military bearing they had come to expect. I'm Elena Vasquez. You can call me Elena. I'm here because your regular training isn't working. And we're going to try something different. Anyone have a problem with that? The recruits exchanged glances, but no one spoke up. They were willing to try anything at this point. Good. First thing we're going to do is get rid of some bad habits. Private Cooper, come here. James stepped forward nervously. Elena handed him an unloaded rifle and told him to take his shooting position. He assumed the stance that had been drilled into him over weeks of training. His feet were precisely shoulder-width apart. His body formed the exact angles specified in the manual. His grip was textbook perfect. Now tell me how you feel, Elena instructed. I feel ready to shoot, James answered, though his voice lacked conviction. No, I mean physically. What do you feel in your body right now? James paused to assess himself. Tension in my shoulders, my legs feel stiff, my neck is getting sore from the way I'm holding my head to look through the scope. Exactly. You're wound up tighter than a spring, and you're trying to shoot accurately while your whole body is fighting itself. That's not going to work. Now I want you to stand however feels natural and comfortable to you. Forget everything you've been taught about stance. Just hold this rifle in a way that feels right. James hesitated, unsure if this was some kind of test. But Elena's expression was patient and encouraging, so he allowed himself to relax. He shifted his weight, adjusted his feet to a more natural position, and let his shoulders drop. The rifle came up to a position that felt comfortable rather than correct. Better, Elena said. How do you feel now? Weird, honestly. Like I'm doing it wrong. You feel weird because you've been conditioned to associate discomfort with correctness. But marksmanship isn't about suffering through the right position. It's about creating a stable, repeatable platform that works for your body. Your body is different from everyone else's. Same rifle, same target, but different body. So your stance should be different too. She moved down the line, having each recruit show her their trained stance and then their natural stance. With each soldier, she made small adjustments, helping them find a position that balanced stability with comfort. She emphasized that shooting was not about rigid positions but about natural body mechanics. After everyone had found a more comfortable stance, Elena brought out targets that were different from the ones they had been using. Instead of the standard military silhouettes at long range, these were large, circular targets placed at just 50 yards. We're starting close and large, she explained. Your confidence is broken, so we need to fix that first. Everyone is going to take turns shooting at these targets, and I guarantee every one of you will hit it. Because these targets are so big and so close that missing would actually be harder than hitting. The recruits looked at the oversized targets skeptically. This felt like a step backward, like being treated as beginners when they had already completed basic marksmanship training. I know what you're thinking, Elena said, reading their expressions. You think this is beneath you. You've already done basic shooting. But your brain doesn't remember success right now. It only remembers failure. So we're going to give it something new to remember. Angela Torres was the first to shoot. She approached the line with her new, more natural stance, aimed at the large target, and fired. The bullet struck well within the circle. It was not a perfect center shot, but it was undeniably a hit. A small smile crossed Angela's face before she could stop it. There it is, Elena said warmly. That's what I wanted to see. That little moment where you remembered what it feels like to succeed. Again. Angela fired 4 more times, hitting the target with each shot. The smile grew wider. By the 10th shot, she was laughing with relief and joy. One by one, the other recruits took their turns. The large targets and short distance meant that everyone hit with every shot. After weeks of constant failure, they were suddenly experiencing shot after shot of success. The psychological impact was immediate and powerful. James Cooper felt something release in his chest as his 5th consecutive bullet punched through the target. He had not realized how much anxiety he had been carrying, how much tension had built up from all those public failures. Now, with each successful hit, that weight was lifting. After everyone had experienced success at 50 yards with large targets, Elena moved the targets back to 75 yards and made them slightly smaller. Still larger and closer than what the recruits had been struggling with, but a step toward the real challenge. Again, everyone hit their marks. You see what we're doing here? Elena asked the group. We're building a ladder of success. Each rung takes you a little higher, but you never take a step so big that you're likely to fall. Your confidence grows with each successful shot, and that confidence becomes the foundation for the next challenge. Derek Wilson raised his hand tentatively. But eventually we need to hit the real targets at the real distances. How do we get there from here? Patience and progression, Elena replied. You don't climb a mountain by starting at the summit. You start at the base and work your way up. Every day will make the shots a little harder, but only as fast as your confidence can keep up. If we push too fast, we'll break the confidence again, and we'll step back a level until you're ready. The morning session continued with gradually increasing difficulty. By lunchtime, the recruits were hitting targets at 150 yards with reasonable consistency. It was still far from the 600-yard shots that Elena had demonstrated the previous day, but it was more progress than they had made in the previous 2 weeks combined. During lunch, Sergeant Hendricks pulled Elena aside. His expression had softened somewhat from the previous evening's skepticism. I'll admit, they're doing better than I expected, he said, but they're still shooting at relatively easy targets. What happens when we get back to the real challenge? We'll get there, Elena assured him, but we need to make sure the foundation is solid first. Right now, they're remembering how to be successful. Once that's firmly established, we can start addressing the specific technical challenges of long-range precision shooting. And what about when they face pressure again? When they know that their performance is being evaluated and their careers might depend on it? That's the next phase. But first things first, let them have a few days of success. Let them start believing in themselves again. The afternoon session introduced a new element. Elena had the recruits shoot in pairs, with one person shooting while the other observed and provided feedback. This was a dramatic change from the previous training, where every shot had been performed under the watchful eyes of instructors who pointed out every flaw. When you observe your partner, Elena instructed, I don't want you to tell them what they're doing wrong. I want you to tell them what they're doing right. Find something positive in every shot, even the misses. Maybe their breathing was good. Maybe their follow-through improved. Maybe they recovered well from a mistake. Find it and name it. This positive feedback loop created an environment where the recruits started supporting each other rather than competing. Nathan Reed noticed that his brother's trigger control was smooth and told him so. Nicholas returned the compliment by praising Nathan's consistent breathing pattern. The atmosphere on the range shifted from tense and competitive to collaborative and encouraging. As the sun began to lower in the sky, Elena called the group together for a final discussion before releasing them for the day. You all made real progress today, she told them. You hit targets consistently, many of you for the first time in weeks. That's not luck. That's not because the targets were easier. It's because you stopped fighting yourselves. You found positions that worked for your bodies. You remembered what success feels like. And you supported each other. She paused, making eye contact with each recruit in turn. Tomorrow, we're going to push a little further. The targets will be smaller and farther away. Some of you might struggle again. That's okay. Struggle is part of learning. But now you know that you can succeed, and that knowledge will carry you through the difficult moments. James Cooper raised his hand. Can I ask you something personal? Elena nodded. Yesterday, when you shot those 7 perfect shots, was that really the first time you'd picked up a rifle since you retired? It was, Elena confirmed. The doctors told me the nerve damage in my hand would make precision shooting nearly impossible. I believed them for 3 years. But yesterday, I realized something. The shooting had never been just about my hand. It was about my mind, my experience, my intuition. The hand is just the tool. The real skill is up here, she tapped her temple. Your bodies are all fine. Your equipment is fine. The thing that needed fixing was your belief that you could succeed. That night, the mood in the barracks was dramatically different from the previous weeks. The recruits talked excitedly about the day's progress, comparing notes on what had worked and making plans for tomorrow's training. For the first time since arriving at this facility, they went to sleep feeling like they might actually become the snipers they had set out to be. The following week brought both progress and challenges that tested everything Elena had taught the recruits. Each morning, they arrived at the range with growing confidence, but Elena was careful not to push too fast. She understood that confidence was fragile, especially confidence that had been rebuilt after being shattered. On the 3rd day of her instruction, Elena introduced wind reading. This had been one of the major obstacles for the recruits in their previous training. The mathematical formulas and complex calculations had overwhelmed them, turning what should have been instinctive into an intellectual exercise that consumed their focus. Forget the formulas, Elena told them, as they stood on the range with a moderate crosswind blowing from the west. I want you to feel the wind instead of calculating it. She had them close their eyes and simply stand in the wind for several minutes. Notice how it pushes against different parts of your body. Notice how it's not constant. It gusts and calms, shifts and swirls. Now open your eyes and look at the flags downrange. See how they move? That's the same wind you just felt. Your body already knows how strong it is. Now you just need to trust that knowledge. Private First Class Angela Torres found this approach revolutionary. She had been drowning in wind formula calculations, trying to factor in distance, velocity, and a dozen other variables. But when she simply felt the wind, aimed where her instincts told her to aim, and fired, the bullet struck much closer to center than any of her calculated shots had. But how do I know if my instinct is right? she asked Elena. You shoot, you observe where the bullet goes, and you adjust. That's how you calibrate your instincts. Every shot teaches your body something. The conscious mind is too slow for real combat situations. You need your subconscious to handle the calculations, and the only way to train your subconscious is through repetition and feedback, not formulas. James Cooper struggled more than the others with this intuitive approach. He had always been someone who liked concrete rules and clear procedures. The idea of trusting his gut feeling seemed unprofessional, even dangerous. What if his instincts were wrong? Elena noticed his hesitation and pulled him aside during a break. You're fighting yourself again, she observed. What's going on? I just don't understand how guessing can be better than calculating, James admitted. We have the formulas for a reason. They're based on physics and mathematics. How can a feeling be more accurate than science? Elena sat down on an empty ammunition crate and gestured for James to join her. Let me tell you about a shot I made in Kandahar. We were providing overwatch for a convoy that got hit by insurgents. I had a target at about 700 meters, but the conditions were terrible. Dust storm rolling in, wind gusting from multiple directions, temperature fluctuating. I could have spent 5 minutes calculating the perfect shot, but the convoy didn't have 5 minutes. She paused, remembering. So I did something that would make any instructor cringe. I just aimed, trusted my experience, and fired. The shot hit center mass. Not because I'm magic, but because my brain had processed thousands of similar situations. All that training, all those formulas I had learned years ago, they were still there. They just weren't conscious anymore. They had become part of my intuition. James considered this. So you're not saying to ignore the science. You're saying to internalize it so deeply that it becomes automatic. Exactly. Right now, you're trying to consciously think through every variable with every shot. That's like trying to walk by consciously commanding each muscle in your legs. You learned to walk by falling down a lot as a baby, and eventually your brain figured out the complex calculations without you needing to think about it. This is the same thing. The conversation helped James relax his approach. Over the next several sessions, he began to trust his instincts more. His accuracy improved dramatically once he stopped trying to calculate everything consciously. By the end of the first week under Elena's instruction, all 5 recruits were hitting targets consistently at 300 yards. This was still short of the 600-yard qualification distance, but it represented enormous progress. More importantly, they were enjoying the process again. The range was no longer a place of dread and public humiliation. It had become a place where they could feel themselves improving daily. However, Sergeant Hendricks raised a concern during the weekly briefing with Colonel Bradford. They're doing better, no question, but they're doing better in a low-pressure environment. Elena has eliminated most of the evaluation and observation that made them nervous in the first place. What happens when we reintroduce that pressure? What happens during their actual qualification, when they know they're being graded and their future depends on their performance? It was a valid concern, and Elena knew she needed to address it. She could not simply keep the recruits in a comfortable bubble forever. They needed to learn to perform under pressure because that was the reality of military service. On the 8th day, Elena announced a change to the training format. Today, we're going to simulate qualification conditions. You'll each fire 10 rounds at targets at 400 yards. Sergeant Hendricks will be observing and scoring each shot according to the official qualification standards. You need 7 hits out of 10 to pass this drill. The mood on the range immediately shifted. The relaxed, confident atmosphere evaporated, replaced by the familiar tension and anxiety. The recruits exchanged nervous glances. This was the moment they had been dreading. The return of judgment and evaluation. James Cooper was selected to go first. As he approached the firing line, Elena noticed his shoulders rising toward his ears, his jaw clenching, all the physical signs of stress returning. He took his position, and she could see him trying to force his body into what he thought was the perfect stance, abandoning the natural position he had been using successfully all week. His first shot missed badly, sailing wide to the right. His second was short. By his 4th shot, he was completely in his head, overthinking every movement, and his accuracy had fallen apart. He ended the drill with only 3 hits out of 10, well below the passing standard. Derek Wilson went next and performed slightly better with 5 hits, but still below the required 7. Angela Torres managed 6 hits but collapsed onto a bench afterward, her hands shaking from the stress. As the morning progressed, it became clear that the reintroduction of pressure had largely undone the progress of the past week. The recruits had reverted to their old patterns of overthinking, tension, and failure. By lunchtime, none of them had achieved a passing score on the qualification drill. Sergeant Hendricks approached Elena with an expression that said, "I told you so," without needing to speak the words. "They can't handle the pressure. We've wasted a week building confidence that collapses the moment it matters." But Elena was not discouraged. This was expected, in fact, this was necessary. They needed to fail under pressure again so they could learn that failure isn't permanent. Now they know where the weakness is. Now we can address it specifically. That afternoon, instead of continuing with shooting drills, Elena sat the recruits down in a classroom and talked about pressure and performance. She shared stories from her own career, times when she had choked under pressure and times when she had succeeded despite enormous stress. "The pressure will always be there in important moments," she told them. "You can't eliminate it. And honestly, you should not want to eliminate it completely. That pressure is your body's way of saying this matters. The adrenaline, the heightened awareness, those are tools if you learn to use them correctly. The problem is that right now, you're interpreting those feelings as signs of danger, and your body is going into panic mode." She taught them a simple mental technique used by elite athletes and combat veterans. Before a high-pressure shot, they would take 3 slow breaths while silently repeating a simple phrase to themselves. Something like, "ready, aim, fire," or "steady, smooth, sure." The words did not matter. What mattered was giving the conscious mind something to focus on other than fear and self-doubt. "Your subconscious knows how to make the shot," Elena explained. "You've proven that all week. But your conscious mind keeps interfering with panic and overthinking. This technique gives your conscious mind a job, a simple, repetitive task, so your subconscious can do the real work." They spent the rest of the afternoon practicing this mental technique in low-pressure situations. The recruits would set up for a shot, go through their 3 breaths and their chosen phrase, then fire. The goal was to make the routine so automatic that it would remain intact even when stress was high. The next morning, Elena announced another qualification simulation. The recruits groaned, but there was less panic than the previous day. They understood now that this was part of the training, not a final judgment. This time, before each recruit shot, Elena had them step back from the line and do something unexpected. She had them do jumping jacks or run in place for 30 seconds to elevate their heart rate and simulate the physical stress of real combat or high-pressure situations. Then, with their hearts pounding and breathing elevated, they would approach the line, do their 3 breaths and mental phrase, and shoot. The results were better, though still not passing. James Cooper managed 5 hits this time. Angela Torres got 6. The Reed twins both scored 5. Derek Wilson had the best performance with 7 hits, exactly the minimum passing score. "Progress," Elena said encouragingly. "You shot better with an elevated heart rate than you did yesterday when you were just standing still. That means you're learning to manage the physical symptoms of stress. Now we need to work on the mental side." Over the following days, Elena continued to increase the difficulty and pressure gradually. She had them shoot while other recruits watched and commented. She introduced time limits, forcing them to set up and fire within a specific window. She created scenarios where they had to shoot at multiple targets in sequence, maintaining focus through a complex string of challenges. Some days were better than others. There were setbacks and frustrations. Nathan Reed had a particularly bad day where he could not hit anything and ended the session sitting alone, questioning whether he should give up entirely. Elena found him there as the sun was setting. "Bad day," she said simply, sitting down beside him. "I thought I was getting better. I thought I had figured it out, but today, nothing worked. Every shot felt wrong. That's going to happen sometimes. Progress isn't a straight line upward, it zigzags. You move forward, you slip back, you move forward again. The key is that the overall trend is upward, even if individual days feel like failures. How do you deal with it? The frustration of failing when you know you're capable of better? Elena was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. I think about all the shots I've made successfully. I remind myself that those good shots prove my capability. A bad day doesn't erase that capability. It just means I'm having a bad day. Tomorrow is a new opportunity. She stood and offered Nathan a hand up. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we're doing something different. Something that I think will help you all make the final leap you need. The next morning, the recruits arrived to find the range set up differently. Instead of the standard targets they had been using, Elena had placed various objects at different distances. An old tire at 300 yards, a propane tank at 400, a metal plate at 500. And at 600 yards, the farthest distance they had attempted, she had set up a simple silhouette target. Today, we're going to stop thinking of this as qualification shooting, Elena announced. We're going to think of it as simply shooting. Each of you will engage these targets in sequence, starting close and working your way out. The only rule is that you can't move to the next target until you hit the current one. There's no time limit, no score, no pass or fail, just you, the rifle, and the targets. James Cooper went first. He hit the tire on his second shot. The propane tank took 3 shots. The metal plate at 500 yards required 5 attempts, but he finally rang it with a solid hit. Then came the silhouette at 600 yards, the distance that had seemed impossible just 2 weeks ago. He set up, went through his breathing and mental routine, and fired. The bullet kicked up dust to the left of the target. He adjusted, fired again, and saw the impact slightly right. Third shot was high. Fourth shot, he felt something click into place. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, and through the scope, he saw the target rock back from the impact. James lowered his rifle and just stood there, stunned. He had done it. 600 yards. The qualification distance. He had hit it. One by one, the other recruits worked their way through the sequence. Angela Torres rang the distant target on her 6th attempt. Derek Wilson needed only 3 shots, showing remarkable improvement. The Reed twins both succeeded after some struggle, Nathan finally hitting his mark on his 9th attempt and immediately pumping his fist in celebration. As the morning progressed, Elena had them repeat the sequence multiple times. Each repetition was slightly easier as their confidence grew and their muscle memory solidified. By lunchtime, every single recruit had hit the 600-yard target at least once, and most had done it multiple times. Sergeant Hendricks, who had been observing from the tower, came down to the range with an expression of genuine surprise. "I'll be damned, they're actually doing it." "They were always capable of doing it," Elena replied. "They just needed to remember that and believe it." That afternoon, Elena introduced the final element, the actual qualification simulation under full pressure. But this time, she had made one important change. Instead of having them shoot alone with everyone watching, she had them shoot in a sequence where each person fired 2 shots, then the next person fired 2 shots, and so on in rotation. This meant that attention was distributed rather than focused on one person at a time. It also meant they could watch each other succeed, building collective momentum. James Cooper fired his first 2 shots at the 600-yard target. Both hit within the qualification zone. Angela Torres followed with 2 more hits. Derek Wilson added 2 more. The Reed twins both contributed their hits. The success built on itself, each shooter gaining confidence from watching the others perform well. By the end of the drill, every recruit had achieved at least 7 hits out of 10, the minimum passing score. Some exceeded that, with Angela Torres finishing with 9 hits and Derek Wilson achieving a perfect 10 out of 10. As the recruits celebrated their success, Elena called them together for a final conversation before their official qualification would take place the following week. "You've come a long way in 2 weeks," she told them, "but I want to make sure you understand what changed. It wasn't your technique, really. The technique you learned in your original training was fine. It wasn't your equipment or your natural ability. Those were always adequate. What changed was your mindset." She looked at each of them in turn. "When you arrived here, you believed you couldn't do it. Every failed shot reinforced that belief until you were trapped in a cycle of failure. What we did was break that cycle by giving you a new set of experiences. Success at close range, then medium range, then long range. Success alone, then success under observation, then success under pressure. Each successful shot rewrote your internal story about who you are as shooters. But what if we fail during the official qualification? Nathan Reed asked, voicing the fear they all still carried. Then you'll try again, Elena said simply. Failure is only permanent if you decide it is. One bad day, one missed shot, doesn't define you. What defines you is how you respond to setbacks. Do you let them destroy your confidence, or do you treat them as temporary obstacles and keep moving forward? The official qualification took place 5 days later. Colonel Bradford was present, along with several other senior officers who had heard about the dramatic turnaround of the struggling sniper recruits. Sergeant Hendricks administered the test according to strict military protocols. All 5 recruits passed on their first attempt. James Cooper scored 8 out of 10. Angela Torres scored 9. Derek Wilson achieved another perfect score with 10 out of 10. Nathan Reed scored 8, and his brother Nicholas scored 9. They were officially qualified as military marksmen and could move forward to advanced sniper training. After the qualification, Colonel Bradford asked Elena to stay on as an instructor for other units that were struggling with similar issues. She agreed to come back on a part-time basis, spending a few weeks each quarter working with soldiers who needed a different approach to their training. As Elena prepared to leave the base and return to her ranch, the 5 recruits came to thank her personally. They brought with them a plaque they had made, engraved with simple words that captured what they had learned. Success lives in the mind before it lives in the world. James Cooper, speaking for the group, said, "You taught us how to shoot. But more than that, you taught us how to believe we could shoot. That was the difference." Elena accepted the plaque with genuine emotion. "You taught yourselves to believe. I just created the conditions where that belief could grow. The courage and persistence were always yours." As she drove away from Fort Benning that evening, Elena thought about her own journey. 3 years ago, she had believed the doctors when they said her shooting days were over. She had accepted that limitation without questioning it. But when she picked up that rifle to demonstrate for the recruits, she had discovered that capability and belief were more powerful than nerve damage and physical limitations. The recruits had learned that lesson too. They had discovered that the biggest obstacles they faced were not physical or technical, but mental. Once they changed their minds about what was possible, their bodies followed. The targets had not changed. The distance had not changed. The rifles had not changed. But everything changed when they changed their relationship with failure and their belief in their own potential. Several months later, Angela Torres wrote Elena a letter from her deployment overseas. She had successfully completed advanced sniper school and was now serving with a specialized unit. She described a difficult shot she had made during a mission, a shot that saved the lives of several soldiers who were pinned down by enemy fire. "I remembered what you taught us," she wrote. "I felt the wind instead of calculating it. I trusted my training and my instincts. The shot hit exactly where it needed to. I never would have had the confidence to take that shot if you hadn't shown us that the weapon we most needed to master wasn't the rifle. It was our own minds." Elena read the letter several times, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. This was why she had returned to teaching despite her injuries and retirement. This was why the work mattered. It was not just about creating skilled shooters. It was about teaching young soldiers that they had more strength and capability than they knew, and that the limits they believed were absolute were often just stories they told themselves. She added Angela's letter to a growing collection she kept in her desk drawer. Letters from the other recruits who had gone on to successful careers. Letters from new students she had trained in subsequent sessions at Fort Benning. Each letter was a reminder that sometimes the most important thing a teacher can do is help students see themselves differently, to recognize potential that had always been there, but had been hidden under layers of doubt and fear. In the end, the story of the young snipers who kept missing their marks until a female veteran took the rifle into her hands was not really a story about shooting at all. It was a story about the power of belief, the importance of rebuilding confidence after failure, and the truth that success often requires not learning new skills, but remembering abilities we had forgotten we possessed. It was a story about how sometimes the best teachers are those who have faced their own failures and limitations and found ways to transcend them. And it was a story that would continue to be told at Fort Benning for years to come, inspiring new generations of soldiers who struggled and doubted, reminding them that the distance between failure and success was often just a change in perspective, a rebuilding of confidence, and a willingness to try one more time even after it seemed hopeless. The targets would always be there, waiting. The question was never whether soldiers could hit them. The question was always whether they believed they could. And once they truly believed, everything else fell into place.